G'day guys, welcome back to the channel. My name's Kaitlyn and I am an American living in beautiful Sydney, Australia. And living in Australia, there are so many culture shocks, and I've shared a lot of American culture shocks on this channel. But you know what? I had to get somebody who wasn't American on here to talk about this because there is so much to learn when you come to Australia. So let me introduce you guys to our favorite British channel, the BAM Famalam. Welcome Maz to the channel.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
This is part 2 to a 2-part series, so if you want to see the first 5 culture shocks that me and Maz have talked about, I will drop the link to that video down below for you guys. Definitely go check them out because they are not repeats of this list at all, trust me. This is such a good list that we put together, so pop on over to the BAM Famalam and check that video out. So Maz, what was a big culture shock for you coming from the UK all the way to Australia?
You know, in the UK, we are very over formal. And so there were silly little things, like once we were looking to buy a house and we sent an inquiry into a real estate agent online and got an email back, yeah, of course, mate, no worries. We were like, it just seemed so odd to us because we were used to everything being very formal, so you wouldn't expect someone in that kind of position to call you mate, especially when they didn't know you and that was the first time of speaking to them. So there were just funny little things like that we didn't, you know, we just laughed about them. We thought it was really funny, but I guess it was just the norm here. But what about you? You know, did you find that peculiar as well?
Yeah, for me it was a big shock coming over here because in America we love titles. So if somebody is a doctor, you're supposed to call them doctor and whatever their last name is. And I remember I used to work in a law firm and we'd have doctors work regularly as experts for us. And I got chewed out my first year as a legal secretary because I accidentally put MD at the end of a doctor's name instead of DO. Whereas over here, I actually work with doctors on a pretty regular basis and they all go by their first names. I have doctors regularly tell me to call them by their first names or sometimes even by a nickname. It's so common to hear people have nicknames over here, and I think that just adds to the whole casual informality of Australia. There are some people who we call by their last name, some people we shorten their first name. It's just so common to hear people talk so casually to each other, even using things like nicknames or just cutting out titles altogether.
My mum was a little bit of an older mum when she had me, and I don't know about you, but I was brought up that you had to call all of your parents' friends auntie or uncle or Mr. or Mrs. whatever their surname was. So I guess I was brought up in quite a formal way, and so I definitely find it funny. And things like the kids' teachers, you know, a lot of them go by their first names, or Mr. D, for example, instead of his whole name. So it's definitely a lot less formal here than we're used to.
On top of that, age isn't really too big of a factor in this. I'm only 30, but I regularly talk to people who are in their 50s and 60s. And in the States, if anybody's even just a little bit above your senior, you're still expected to call them Mr. or Mrs. Whereas over here, it's really common for people to call each other by their first name, no matter how much older somebody is. There's still this level of respect, but at the same time there's this informality and casualness between people here, and I absolutely love that. I can talk to somebody who's a teenager and they're not going to call me Mrs. or Miss. They're going to call me by my first name, and same thing if I'm talking to somebody who's in their 60s or 70s. There's this overall level of respect that's still in this informality here in Australia, but I absolutely love that people here are just so casual and you don't have to worry too much about titles or saying the correct name or anything like that over here. It's just so much more relaxed.
Yes, people certainly aren't going to get offended if you get something wrong or don't say exactly the right thing. And like you were talking about the doctors, you know, no one's going to get offended if you drop the wrong letter or something like that, because it just doesn't seem to be a thing.
So one huge shock when I came over here, and I mean quite literally huge shock, is seeing Huntsman Spiders around. So in the States we had spiders, but the biggest we would see were these little daddy long legs. They were probably the biggest spiders that I was used to seeing over in the States. Here, huntsmen are everywhere in Australia, and it's pretty regular to see a spider on your wall that's about the size of your palm. That is terrifying first thing in the morning when you're not expecting it and you turn and just see a huntsman stuck up on your wall somewhere. So even though they're very friendly, and I've learned to just ignore them, or if I feel a little bit too uncomfortable, maybe shoo them outdoors somewhere, it's such a big shock coming over here and seeing these massive spiders. Even though they're friendly and they don't bite, they're not venomous, they're not some of those spiders that have a little bit of a reputation over here in Australia for being deadly. It's still a big shock walking around and seeing a massive spider on your wall. What about you, Maz? Have you seen any huntsmen lately?
I've got to say that we were never scared of spiders. Like that's never been a worry for us. But Ben's first experience with a huntsman was absolutely hilarious. I was eating dinner and I think I'd got back later than him, so that's why I was eating on my own. And so we saw the first huntsman that we'd ever seen. And Ben went to catch it with a tub so that he could take it outside. But what we didn't know about huntsman spiders was that they jump. So that was hilarious, because I was watching him trying to catch this spider and then it's jumping at him and he's squealing because he wasn't expecting it to jump. And so I sat at the table laughing, but we didn't really know what kind of spider it was because we were quite new to the country. But it was just a really funny experience. They're not something that we've ever worried about. We get them occasionally, but we do have a pest spray on our house. So that's something that we weren't familiar with. And that's that every year the pest guy comes round, he sprays the house, and then you don't get all the bugs. Or you get them more for about a week afterwards, but then you don't get so many bugs. Do you have to have yours sprayed in the US, or is that just an Australian thing?
So I think it depends on where you live over in the States. Because I lived in a pretty densely populated city, we didn't really have pest control unless you actually had a pest problem. But it wasn't typical for somebody to have their house sprayed yearly. Over here in Western Sydney, we actually don't get our house sprayed regularly, but we do have a spray from Bunnings that we'll use. Once in a while, we see those little slightly dangerous redback spiders pop up in our little crawl space under the house, so we just spray for them and then they're gone in a couple days. So that was one thing that also shocked me over here with spiders, is when we bought this, I guess, this massive tub of bug repellent and bug killer from Bunnings, it actually had a redback spider on there. So seeing a venomous spider advertised on the outside of a bug spray was just absolutely shocking to me. Overall though, for the most part, we just leave the huntsman alone, and we're lucky that we haven't had any serious bug problems over here that we've needed to call somebody to come out every year. But since huntsmen eat mosquitoes, I am perfectly happy to have them living around us as long as they're living outside and not in the house.
Oh my gosh, though, redback underneath your house, that is frightening. We've not seen any that are really bad yet. So yeah, you've probably had it worse than we have. One thing, and this is kind of going a little bit back to the informality thing we were just talking about. One thing that really surprised us when we moved here was how openly people speak. So if, for example, something's happening in their private life, in the bedroom, they are not afraid to tell you. And it doesn't even matter if you don't know them that well, they'll tell you anyway. And you know, we've met friends, and I remember this one lady, absolutely love her, but she was telling Ben and I about something, and we just didn't know what to say because we weren't used to those kind of conversations. We didn't know how to respond, and so we were just like, oh, okay, that's nice. Because we didn't know how to respond. It just took us by surprise. And then we learned it's not really an unusual thing. It seems to be quite normal for people to talk like that. And even people, when they're having problems in their relationships, they talk about it openly on Facebook, even though they might still be with this person. There doesn't seem to be such a filter as we're used to. Have you noticed that as well?
Oh, I've definitely noticed that as well. Over in the States, we follow that rule of there's 3 things you don't talk about, particularly at the dinner table, and that's politics, religion, and sex. And over here, Aussies have no problem talking about all 3 of those topics, whether it's somebody that you've known for a long time or somebody that you just met at the pub 5 minutes ago. They have no problem being very open, almost to a point where it's a little too open in some conversations. but I've gotten a little bit more used to people talking openly. I hear a lot of people talk very openly about their health problems and their family problems over here. In the States, it wasn't very common to talk about health issues or health concerns. That was something that was typically a keep it to yourself kind of topic. But over here, people are pretty open to share what's going on in their personal life, whether it's something that's happening with them, something with their partner or their kids or a parent. It's very common for Aussies to talk pretty openly. There isn't this uptight, stiff notion when it comes to talking about certain topics. Aussies sometimes talk about politics, but they do so in an almost mocking sense. I've never met an Aussie who takes politics seriously, compared to the States where everybody seems to take politics seriously. And there are Aussies who are very open to talking about their sex life. And I feel like it really comes down to the person so much. I know plenty of Aussies who would never share anything like that. They kind of see that as something that's intimate between two people. But I know some Aussies who go into very explicit detail, especially after one or two drinks. So it's pretty common for people to talk openly about just about any topic here in Australia.
Isn't it funny? I didn't realise that Americans and Brits would be so similar in that way, because like yourselves, we don't tend to talk about health problems. I guess, I don't know that it's being uptight necessarily. I don't know, it's just something that we've been brought up that we wouldn't discuss. And like you know, politics and religion, they're conversations that Ben and I wouldn't have with people, because we're very conscious of offending, and that's part of our culture. We don't want to offend people, and so those are conversations that I remember as a child being told, don't ever have those conversations with people. It upsets people if you don't agree with them. So that's something I've taken with me into adulthood. And to be honest, I still don't really. And money is the other one, actually, that Aussies talk about quite openly. Again, something that as Brits we wouldn't really discuss with other people. So there's quite a lot of topics, actually. I was thinking it was just kind of the sex and, you know, about relationships, but actually you're right. There's quite a lot more things that are kind of taboo where we're from, but not here. You can talk about anything here.
And that was one of the things that really surprised me, because when I came over, Aussies are so manner focused and manner driven. You say your please and thank you, your excuse me, and overall there's just this politeness over here. So hearing Aussies talk so openly about something that as an American I was taught was actually very rude to discuss was a huge shock, because I had always equated the idea of not talking about politics or money to being respectful and having manners, whereas over here it seems like that doesn't really fall into manners. It's more of like the please, the thank you, and just overall tone of respect. So seeing that pretty clear divide was a huge shock.
Yes, I quite agree. And like you say, it's not being disrespectful. Like as we were brought up that, you know, that was rude to have those conversations. I quite agree with you. It's not that people are being rude here, because they're not generally. It is just that is part of their culture. And I mean, there's definitely benefits to being so open, maybe not about some things, but there's definitely benefits about being open about your health and things like that I do think it's a good idea in some ways.
Moving to Australia, I knew that the Postal Service was going to run a little bit differently, but I was not expecting to see things like postie bikes over here in Australia. I had no idea what they were, and I remember asking Mark why these people were riding around on these little, almost scooter bikes in this bright yellow fluorescent uniform, and he's like, that's the Postal Service. I almost fell over, because being from the States, we're used to seeing postmen in those big white vans with the logo on the side, and they'd have their giant blue rucksack that they would carry around door to door. So seeing posties actually deliver mail by bike was a huge shock over here. And on top of that, this is such a weird little detail, but mailboxes over here in Australia are so different from the mailboxes I'm used to seeing over in the States. Aussies have a mailbox typically on their front lawn. And it's not very common to see a mailbox too close to the actual house itself. Normally it's right by the front lawn, by the footpath. Whereas over in the States, it's very common to have a mailbox literally right next to your door, or sometimes you don't even have a mailbox. There are still people I know in the States who use those old mail slits in the front door. So it really does depend on where you live in the States. I know if you live on a much larger property, it's common to have a mailbox up front. But it shocked me seeing like these mailboxes on everybody's front lawns over here. Maz, what was it like for you over in the UK? And was any of this a shock, or is it just the American in me?
See, I've got a feeling that, do you know, it's such a long time since we've lived in the UK. I think some of them had bikes, but they definitely wouldn't have driven up to the front door like they would here to put it in a letterbox. You know, they wouldn't kind of drive right up to the letterbox and not even bother getting off the bike like they do here. But we all nobody had a letterbox out in the front garden. It was always a letterbox in the door. So that's definitely different. It kind of, to me, I think sometimes it could be a security issue, the way we have it here in Australia, because a lot of them aren't locked from the back. And so I guess in the US or in England, we would have been a lot more conscious of security, whereas, I don't know, stealing post doesn't seem to be such a big thing here. So yeah, it's very different for us. And like, as you know, we're on this larger property now, so our letterbox is really far away. It's quite a long way away. We have to go for a long walk to go and get it. The funny thing as well is that in the more rural communities here, you don't even necessarily get all of your post into your post box. Often they'll just take it back to the post office and you have to go and collect your post, because the rural communities here, they just can't have mailmen going all to every single house. It's just too much. So that's something that's quite unusual. Obviously not something you would have down in Sydney, but up here that is the case for a lot of us. Similar to you, Kaitlyn, we are used to a cold Christmas, and then to go into a warm Christmas, you've got good intentions and you think, oh yeah, it's going to be so much fun. But then it can be a little bit of a shock when you actually get into Christmas and you're sweating and you can't wear a Christmas jumper because you would literally cook. How was your first Christmas here, Kaitlyn?
So Christmas for me was a huge, huge shock, Maz. I think because my very first Christmas, I was actually over here on holiday and hadn't moved to Australia yet. So for me, I was still going through the novelty of everything. Everything in Australia was so new, and I was just traveling around and experiencing things. But my second Christmas over here, once I actually moved, was a huge shock. It was such a big shock getting used to the weather, the different types of foods that people cook over here, and people still try to cook the traditional Christmas hams and whatnot where you have to put the oven on and it's 35, 40 degrees in some places. Having a Christmas lunch instead of a Christmas dinner was a huge surprise. And also seeing people have lunch on Boxing Day with friends and family over here was a big shock as well, because Boxing Day is not a thing over in the States.
Oh, what do you do on Boxing Day?
I mean, for the most part, we have off the next day for a lot of people, especially if you have kids who are in school, because kids will be off probably from about Christmas Eve until a day or two after New Year's. So it's pretty common for parents to either take the whole week off. It's really just a day to relax after all the crazy hustle and bustle of running around on Christmas. I know some people will immediately start to unpack all of their Christmas decorations, box everything up, and get ready for the next holiday, whereas a lot of people also take it easy because they'll be traveling to see friends and family. So the day after is just a day to relax and unwind. It's not a holiday or anything like that. But I do know some people who also go to the malls too the day after Christmas to exchange some things that they might have received and weren't too happy with.
Oh. So the funny thing is over here, over here we would, like you say, we would go and visit friends and make a bit of a day of it. In the UK, we probably would have hit the shops because that's the day all the sales come out, and those are the really good sales, are the Boxing Day ones. So I don't know that there's too much difference. I mean, it's still an event as such. But for you, it obviously seems like more of a non-event. But to Australians and to the Brits, it's still a day that you either go and spend with family or you hit the shops. Not to return things though, but just to get the really good sales.
For us, another big shock was just leading up to Christmas, because in the States we have Thanksgiving, which is the fourth Thursday in November. But that's sort of the kickoff, is the day after Thanksgiving. Everything becomes Christmas. Everything's holiday related after that. So over here in Australia, I've noticed it's a little bit more of a gradual transition, maybe around like even early to mid-November is when the shops will start to put Christmas things out. And then next thing you know, you go in the shops in the beginning of December and suddenly everything is Christmas over here. It's a little bit more of a gradual transition, whereas in the States we have Thanksgiving and then the next day is Black Friday with all the big Christmas sales. So it's a bit of a shock seeing this slightly more gradual transition over here.
Oh gosh, I think in the UK they probably start in like July, August time to put all the decks up. It's very early over there, and December is a month where pretty much every night you're out doing things, and there's parties and pub, you know, part of the pub culture as well that we spoke about in the previous video. December's a real event for us, but there is a massive lead up to it starting back in maybe August, September at the latest, I would imagine. It's been a while since I've been there at Christmas time. So do you miss Christmas in the US? Do you think you'd love to be there again for that?
You know, I'd love to go over there. I'd love to bring my husband over so he can actually experience a cold Christmas. But I also love just how casual and laid back Christmas is here in Australia. You don't have a lot of Christmas parties that you're running around to beforehand. You don't have all of these houses that you have to visit a week or two before Christmas. You don't have all of these gifts that you have to buy. It's so much more relaxed and easygoing here, and I feel like Christmas is more a chance to spend time with families, spend time with friends, go to the beach, have a barbecue, chill out for a little bit. Whereas over in the States, it could be a little bit more formal. People stick a lot more to traditions that they have. People's calendars are absolutely jam-packed 2 weeks before. So Christmas in the States, as nice as it can also be so exhausting. Whereas over here in Australia, it's so much more relaxed, and I feel like it really does focus on what Christmas is supposed to be, which is really getting to spend time with family and friends.
It certainly does seem a lot more like a one-day event here, as opposed to just as opposed to it being the whole month. Like you, we would have been used to events throughout the Christmas period as opposed to just Christmas Day. Do you know, it's probably the one time of year that we would really enjoy being back in the UK. You know, we did really enjoy Christmas. Not to say we don't enjoy it here, but we do kind of miss that. I hate to say that because, you know, on our channel, all of our viewers will know that we absolutely love Australia. It probably is just the one day of the year that we think, oh, we would quite like to be there. It is nice to have a cold Christmas and it's what we're used to. But we've made new traditions here, and we go hell for leather. We've got 3 daughters here. And so we make sure that it's a fun event still. We make sure it's a really big deal. But we're having to work a lot harder to make it feel Christmassy, for us as well. So for our girls, it's all they've known, but for us, we have to really go out there to get it and make it feel like Christmas.
No, I completely get that. Christmas is a day where, even though I'm glad to be in Australia, I still miss my family. But for me, being an American, the 2 biggest days where I feel just that extra touch of homesickness is the 4th of July and Thanksgiving. Because Thanksgiving isn't a thing over here. It's often pretty warm by the end of November too. So it can get really hot if you're in the oven trying to make a Thanksgiving dinner for just a couple of people. And being the 4th of July in the States, it's summer, so everybody's at the beach, everybody's having barbecues and parties, and over here it's cold, it's chilly. I'm like wrapped up in a hoodie and a blanket, shivering away when I'm so used to those warm 4th of July days over in the States. So I do miss Christmas, but for me, those 2 big holidays that really give me that just pinch of homesickness are the 4th of July and Thanksgiving.
You'd almost have to come up to Queensland, Kaitlyn, for the 4th of July because it never really gets too cold here. At least you might not need those cardigans and coats and stuff that you need down in Sydney. Isn't it funny though how you're just used to things being a certain way, and it's not that you're not embracing your new life, but it's just that there are certain events that are really special, and I guess it's kind of a nostalgia even, that you're used to them being a certain way, and so it's a little bit of a shock to the system when they're not quite as you're used to. But do you have many American friends where you are that you all get together on these American event days?
So there's actually a group on Facebook called Americans in Sydney, and they put together a 4th of July party. They put together a Thanksgiving lunch. They actually just had a Super Bowl party that my husband and I went to because the Eagles were in the Super Bowl, and sadly we lost, but we will not talk about that game in this video. So they do put events together, but overall, it's still not quite the same feeling. You're meeting a lot of new people, but at the same time, you miss not just the nostalgia, but it's a chance to miss your friends and family a little bit more too. It's nice having other Americans around who can appreciate what you're going through, but at the end of the day, it's just one of those days where you miss your friends and family just a little bit more than your average day.
Yeah, I suppose for us, I mean, we don't really have any massive events on the calendar apart from Christmas Day. That is the real big one for Brits. So we don't have like Thanksgiving Day or anything like that. So I guess for us, where you miss your family on those dates, for us it is just Christmas that we kind of have that feeling of thinking, oh, it would be nice to see everybody and to be in the cold and, you know, wearing winter clothes and going to all the parties and, you know, see all the massive decorations. I know there's decorations here, but you know, every country it's different. It's interesting to know actually that you've got the American community there and that you're getting together and doing all these lovely things and kind of making each other feel a bit better when some of you might have felt homesick otherwise.
Maz, thanks so much for coming on the channel and sharing some of your culture shocks. Let me know in the comments down below, you guys, was there anything on this list that surprised you? If you've moved over to Australia, were there any culture shocks that really shocked you? Remember, this is part 2 of a 2-part series, so pop on over to the BAM Famalam's channel and check out part 1. Believe me, those are 5 culture shocks you do not want to miss. So Maz, thank you so much for coming on the channel today.
Thank you so much for having me, Kaitlyn. It was a pleasure.
Alright guys, don't forget, if you like this video, please hit the like and subscribe button down below. I so appreciate the support, you guys. And as always, I will see you in the next video. Bye!